Is this writing? Yes, not bad. If you have a, do it over here. Normally, you say slash, if you do resources items, you get slash items, you get slash items 1, etc. So basically, if anything follows the slash, it's going to be an index into the collection. However, you want to add a new one, which is a little different. It's slash search. It's not, what it's not is slash items slash 1 slash search. Okay? So this is called a collections route, or a, what was the term? That's what it's called, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's take a look at a default routes.rb file, so we can find an example of that. Okay. Let's see if there's one in here. Just guessing here. Yeah. Okay. So, so look at this one. That says for every member, I would like in addition a short and a toggle command. So what that would produce is, so I'm looking at this. It produces in that specific example slash products slash n slash 5 slash short. Okay, so I want to add some additional things per member. If I want to add it to the whole collection, I do this, and so that would produce slash products slash sold. So the key is what makes it a collections thing is the fact that you want to apply it to the whole family of products, or in your case, items, versus one for each. So in your case, you're going to end up with something that looks a little bit like this. Resources, items, I don't know what, I forget the example exactly, and then in there do, and then collection, get, search. And that's going to lead to a HTTP GET on the search action of the items controller. That answer your question?
Yeah.
Any other questions like that we can quickly cover? Yes?
So I'm keeping getting this arrow that says no routes matches post items search. I have the impression that there's nothing to post there.
Yeah, because here's what's happening with you. I'm just guessing, you have a form that has a button on it, and that button, by default, always does a post. So all you got to do is change your route. Instead of saying get search, say post search. And now it'll be sending a post, it'll be expecting a post HTTP verb against that URL. Any other questions? Okay, good. Great, excellent. Let's see. Over here. So what I'm going to be doing first, and we'll see how it goes. First of all, any questions about tomorrow and Friday? I did send an email about that. I just want to make sure that there's no confusion. Good.
So tomorrow we have the demo for 5 minutes.
Presentation and demo, yeah. Yeah.
And what do we have on Friday? Because on the website it says kind of the same thing. That Wednesday and Friday.
No, yeah, Friday is essentially the same thing. Friday you have nothing other than to know that that's when we're going to review that stuff.
Okay.
So you want to make sure, go through the bullet list and make sure you've gotten as close as you can to it. That's all. Just a heads up. There's no extra work there. In fact, I reduced the work for Friday to give you, I mean by a little bit, to give you more time to, patch anything up that needs to be patched up. Okay? And so tomorrow, the way tomorrow's going to work is basically we're going to take turn at some random order of projects, and you're going to have about 10 minutes, but it's not going to be tightly timed. Just talk about the things I mentioned, and then do a demo, and you'll have Q&A from the rest of the class. Okay, good. So, so what we're going to talk about first is authentication. Again, but this time I'm going to look at code and talk about code. Okay, so I'm going to be using the auth demo source code. And let me move this to the side. And let me move this to this side. And let's see what's going on here. First of all, I've talked about this till I was green in the face, blue in the face, whatever color. There are gems to implement authentication. Usually they obscure what you can learn about how it works. And they make it look more automatic and more magical until it stops working, and then you're going to be mystified. So at least for learning purposes, I think it's a good idea to try to do the simple most authentication that gets built into Rails. Okay? So the first important thing is, let's go look at the code now, is that at the top of the the user model, you add, and you might have done, yes.
Did you zoom in on?
Oh yeah. Zoom in your eye. Don't you have one of those bionic eyes? How's that, better?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. So at the top of the model that's going to contain the password, there's this line called pass secure password. This actually is simply a method call that's being inherited from Active Record Base. Okay? And that basically establishes a few other methods you're going to use in getting the authentication to work. It's not always the user model. It could be whatever it is, wherever it is that you want to store the password. Okay, and usually it is user. It could be accounts or anything like that. As you can see here, I'm just looking at my own notes. To use the basic authentication that's built into Rails, the freebie, you use it makes certain assumptions, which it'll check that the model includes a field called password digest, does not contain a field called password, and it implements various aspects of the authentication model for you. So if you take a look at my migrations here, which live in the DB directory, you will see only one, create user, and it says users, that's kind of, that's create users, yes, and it contains whatever I want plus password digest. Okay, so that's the first step. Okay, good. So the principle obviously is that the database only stores the password digest, not the passwords, which is why you shouldn't have a password field in there, because it's going to, and the digest, the word digest, by the way, is another word for you might call it a hash, you might call it a fingerprint, you might call it a checksum. It's some impossible to reverse engineer magic number which you can compute from a text password. So password, it's a one-directional hash. You may have learned about it in other classes. It's an algorithm that takes some string and translates it reliably into a specific other string in such a way that it's essentially impossible to go the other way. So if I know the hash, there's no way, quote unquote, that you can compute the password unless like you're the NSA or something like that. Okay. All right, good. So then, the next thing, as we discussed, is, let me see what I want to say next. All right, let's keep going. So basically what it says here is model logic is supplied by the hash secure password. On create, when you create the user, it's going to automatically take the password and the password confirmation, because that's when you're creating your password, apply any validations you have, compute the password, the encrypted password, and store that in the model. So even though the model class looks as if it has a password field, in the database there's no password field. So on create, you will in fact see, as you can see here, which is kind of confusing, user create, user is the active record model, email is blah, and it says here password ABC, password confirmation ABC. It looks from that as if there's a password field, but in fact there isn't one. And that's what this has secure password macro does. So this create gets intercepted. The password and the password confirmation are compared to each other to make sure they match. They get encrypted, and that's what's stored into the database for you. It's actually very simple. So subsequently, you can do a call that says, look for user where email is timbrandes@edu, and you're going to find one, and then you're going to say authenticate ABC. Now, was that a hand or just a, okay. So who can say what they think happens? So I'll give you part of it. User where email is this is going to return an array of all the users that have that email. Presumably there's only going to be one. First is going to pull out the first one of those. So now we have a user object, an object from the class user, and then it says authenticate quote ABC. What do you think that does? Yes?
If the password is ABC, it will return the user. If the password is not, it will return false.
Right. And how is it doing that? How is it checking the password?
I don't know.
Okay. Anybody? How is it checking the password? I mean, after all, the password is not stored in the database. And remember what I said about a one-way hash or a one-way.
Well, it hashes the password, right?
Yeah.
And it compares that hash to the existing hash in the database.
Exactly. So user Tim at brandeis.edu has a hashed magic number, gobbledygook, and
Although,
this.
can I say something about this?
You may.
Certain hackers, I think what they do is that they, even though they can't reverse the hash back to the original password,
Yeah.
they have certain common mappings between a password and its hash.
Absolutely,
hash code. So
yeah.
they can, in that sort of pseudo reverse it.
And it's a lot more, obviously that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's called a dictionary attack in the lingo. The dictionary attack is I have a dictionary of all the words in the English language, but any language. I subject all of them to the forward hash out of bcrypt, because that's well known. And then I look at the answer, see if it matches. But then it goes further. It takes the words, it combines them with 000, it changes the A's to @ signs. It keeps doing this at a mass scale until it finds a hit. So there's ways to defeat that, which are all sort of hidden from you, but built into the simple authenticate. Yes, do you have a question?
Yeah, but if it's not in the database, I mean, not in the fields, there's no field stored in the password, so where is it stored in the database?
The password is never stored in the database, just the encryption. So if pardon?
I mean, so where is the encryption stored?
In the database, it's stored as the field that was called here, password digest. See? That is a real field in the database, password digest. That's where it's stored. So if you look at the database, you'll see gobbledygook there. Okay? All right. So, good. So how does so basically if you look at those two things, those are the way the calls would appear when you're trying to process a login. So you would say, the user would say, I'm Tim at brandeis.edu, and my password is ABC. That comes up in the form. You hit login. That does a post rather to the session controller. The session controller will make this call, and if it works, then it's going to set that value as currently logged in user. If it fails, it's going to throw an error. Okay, so here I go. Displaying, so how do we log in and out? That's one of the basic operations. So we display the login page. Let's take a look at the code that does that. It's a session controller. Actually, is it? Let me just see here. Yeah, sessions controller, and when we look at the views for the session controller, so there's one thing that's very odd about the sessions controller that's unlike every other controller you've ever seen. What is odd about it that's unlike any other controller you've seen? And you can't tell by looking at what I'm putting on the screen here, because what's missed is something that's not there, so you won't see it. Yes?
Functions, methods.
Well, there are a few methods there. There are methods. There's two methods, create and destroy. Yes?
Sessions don't have a model?
Sessions don't have a model. Sessions don't have a model. They're the only, there's other examples, but this is the first time we've seen a controller and a view that does not have a model. So what's going on is, if you want to try to conceptualize it, a session is an entity which is created in a very transient way and lasts only as long as the user is logged in, and then it's gone. So it never gets stored, so it has no model. The sessions controller is different from the user controller. The user controller has things like, edit my password, things like that. Do you have a hand?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, if we want to make an auto logout feature, how would you go about implementing that?
Okay? Tell me what the functionality of your auto logout feature.
Well, let's say after a certain duration of time, it could be 30 minutes, 20 minutes.
Okay?
The user, if he's not, moving the cursor around, he's not typing anything, he gets automatically logged out, put back into the home screen.
Okay. Well, let's do part one, which is if I try to refresh my page and I have not been logged in, I haven't touched the page, I haven't done anything for the last 30 minutes, I wanted to tell me, sorry, you're logged out. So how would you do that? Anybody want to take a guess? Yes.
Maybe we can parse through the log of what this user is doing, how many gets and posts in the last, with a timestamp, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah, you could do that. There's easier ways. Anybody want to else take a guess? Yes.
The way I even though I asked this question, the way I think might be the way you can go about doing it,
Yeah.
is that you have the session key, it
Yeah.
expires after a certain period of time. And if the user is not like moving around,
Yeah.
doing anything, he doesn't get the new one.
How do you make it expire?
You just, you automatically make it agree to sign a new one after a fixed duration of time.
Yes, sir.
There's in that Rails Ruby on Rails guide that you posted on security.
Yeah.
It gives you exactly how to do it.
Okay, so
Like,
you just describe it to us?
Yeah, it's called .sweep in Active Record.
Uh-huh.
And you create in your session, you create a class session, which is basically, I guess, a model. I'm not really sure. And then you do def self.sweep.
Yeah.
Time equals like 1.hour or 1.minute.
Uh-huh.
And it will log out after that, and there's just like a whole.
There's a whole thing there. Okay, so let's drop that. So that's probably a fancier way.
No, it's like 100 lines of code.
Well, okay, but it runs 100,000 lines of code in the background. So it's still a fancy way. But I want you guys to think through about how you would do it. Anybody else want to take a stab? Just using your brains as a computer person? But what do we have to, yes?
Look at when a specific session was last used, and if so, for a given time, and like set that session to nil on a server.
Yeah, right. So let's think about this. So the first thing we have to record is when the session was first created, when I logged in, right? So when in addition to storing current user or logged in user in my session, I also store time at which I was logged in. So now the session carries around not only the user ID of who's logged in, but also the time and date and time when they were logged in. Now the next thing is you want to catch if anybody does anything in the product and the time has expired. So one thing you can do is there's this thing called an application controller. Okay? The application controller is the parent, inheritance-wise, of every other controller. See here? And the application controller is in the stack whenever any action happens. So what you could do is put a before action on your application controller that says before any action happens, check current time and date against the logged in session's time and date, and if it exceeds 30 minutes, throw an error. Or if it exceeds 30 minutes, mark it logged out. So that's a really simple way to do it, but it has some flaws. Go ahead.
Here's the question, how's it actually recorded?
How's it what?
Recorded,
How's what recorded?
the actions. So like, how does it, like Hugh was saying earlier that, would you have to store some sort of log?
Oh no, because remember every time I hit the server,
Yeah.
I'm doing an HTTP GET put whatever, and the effect of that, as we well know, is to eventually call an
I
action.
feel like some websites, they don't just like base it on that, but can like even record if you scroll down the same page.
Yeah, okay, so there are flaws. The other flaw is that it doesn't proactively tell you, boom, you were logged out. It only tells you that you were logged out once you go try to do something. So it's got weaknesses, for sure. I think that if you want to record somebody scrolling, you're going to have to put some JavaScript code in there that records that and sends a request, am I still good? And then JavaScript will time you out. But then you have other sites that say, if you don't touch the session in 30, 29, 28, so that's even more complicated. But it's the same general principle, which is when you log in, you mark a date timestamp, and whenever action is detected, you check that and kick the guy out if time has passed. Good question, though. Interesting question. Okay. So now we're going to take a look at the routes that go with this. Well, first we have to think about how we log in. So I said log in and out displays the login page. Let's look at the view. We just looked at that. And interestingly, the login page is the new action on the session controller. So we're not creating a new session in Active Record, but we're creating it in memory. And the new session, the new action calls that, and essentially collects the email and the password, and does a submit sign in. So this is a very vanilla form. And when you click this, as we discussed a few minutes ago, it does a post to the sessions controller and to the particular action called sessions. Session. So you're posting a session. Okay, so we go now to the sessions controller, and we're basically here creating the session. Take this next page one out. And here's what it does, exactly what I described before. It does a user find by name, and then it does a user authenticate. Params session is the particular session that we're trying to authenticate, and the password is the field coming out of the login password. And if that succeeds, it calls sign in user. We'll look at that in a second. And if it fails, we do an error, invalid, blah, blah, blah. And then we render new, which puts up the login dialog again. Okay? So let's take a look at sign in user. Now, sign in user typically lives in the application controller. No, I think we get it for free because we're using the simple application. Yeah, we get all those goodies for free because we're using this magical simple auth. Okay? So it's basically calling that method, and that method records who the user is that was logged in, and you automatically get the current user and all those other methods that we talked about. Okay, so let's take a look at that in practice. Let's see how far this example goes. Yeah, it doesn't go very far, so I don't really illustrate in this example checking. But let's go. Let me look at what the other points is that I wanted to make. So sessions control, we talked about tricky. It has no model. That's one tricky thing. It maps a URL, a route, to some code. We know that well. The code will execute when you log in and when you log out. This is all what I just described. This is just about how to create any form. It's just very generic stuff. You've read about that already. Active record triggers are things that get called before different operations within a model file. So in this case, we're using it to make sure before we save the user, before save, make sure that we store the email and we lowercase the whole email. That's being done as a before action. It could be done in other ways as well. And the other thing is before create, this is also a built-in method, create remember token. Okay. Gotcha. Interesting. I couldn't remember what that was for. So the idea, this again is sort of a bit of security. If I log in and I'm going to user/5 and it's pedo, I've leaked some information to a potential attacker that the user ID 5 in my relational database happens to be pedo. So the remember token converts that to another encrypted number so that somebody can see it in the URL, but it won't tell them anything. And this is just sort of boilerplate. You know, you can just use this stuff, and as you use it more, you will understand it better. But the key principles are very clear. The session controller is not corresponding to a model. You create a session, you end the session. There's the current user method. Everybody pretty much clear on that? Okay, great. Now, before I came here, I tried to run the tests, and they were failing. But I don't think I'm going to waste our time debugging it in front of you. But I want to just show you tests to show you how this stuff can be tested. And you can go. This is obviously in my GitHub account, so you're welcome to look at it, play with it, copy code, whatever. Oh, did somebody ask me about how to ask the form how to make a complicated seed with nested dependencies? We'll talk about it. Remind me. Did anybody answer?
No.
Okay. The key trick to realize is that the seed.rb is just a Ruby file, so you can do anything you want. Okay. I'll come back to that. Remind me to come back to that. But the tests. Let's look at the tests. So the user's controller test. Let's see what it does. Let's read this test. This is written in test unit. In Minitest. Test unit is the old. This is old code. It may still be using test unit. Let me just quickly check. The way you check is you go here, and it might actually be using still the old testing framework. But again, as I told you before, the concepts are very, very similar, so you could easily read this. So this says, to test a user controller, each of these is a test, so they should be able to run independently without, oh, this is funny, this is the whiteboard, not the screen, it works fine. Each one should be able to run independently without order dependency, and before any of them run, it always does this. And what does that line say? This is a line that looks weird, you haven't seen it before, but maybe one of you know what it does. What does that line number 5 do? Yes?
It gets the picture.
Yes. Yes. Fixture from users tagged as 1. So let's go look at the fixtures real quick. There's 2 fixtures built in. One is called 1, one is called 2. You can put 100 of these if you want. And they're available, remember, only during tests. So they don't pollute your database, it's just there for tests. And so that line simply says, okay, set up the instance variable @user to be user1, just to have a user. And the first thing it says is, I should be able to go to the index page successfully. Very, very simple test. It simply says get index, which is do a get request on the index page, and make sure that the HTTP returns success. And secondly, make sure that it does not assign its value to @users. Let me show you where that comes from. I'm not going to go through all of these. So it's going to go to the index, get index, so we're going to look at the routes. And we'll see here that the root is user's index, is a user controller index action. So look at the user controller index action, and there it is. And it says @users equals user.all. So that implies that, no, that's not right, is it? Yes, because we got to look at, this is always tricky. Don't forget to look at the before action. That gets called before anything happens. So let's look at what setUser does. So all the way down here, here it is, setUser, and it looks up, actually it's not, this is index, only show edit, so does not get called. So, interesting, this is not what I thought I would see. Let me just see, make sure I try to understand what's going on here. Get index. Oh, yeah, okay, gotcha. All right, let me explain how to read this line. This line simply says that when this user's controller operation finishes, what instance variables have been set. And we know from this that we expect the @user instance variable to have been set. If this action worked, that @user instance variable would have been set, correct? So this test is verifying that. This test is saying, assert that it returns success, and in addition, this is kind of convoluted, that it does assign to a user a certain amount. So that's how it tests that particular action. Let's look at a sessions controller test, more interesting. We do a get to the login route, and it says assert response success, it should succeed. Okay, so let's go look at the login route. And yeah, this is obviously incomplete, so I'm not going to actually go through there. But this is just an idea of what controller tests look like. Okay, I think I've sucked this particular example dry. Any questions about it? Okay, let's move to the question that was asked about seed data. So tell me again what the example for seed data that you were looking for was. The seed data example.
2 tables.
Yeah.
Respond to any relationship.
Yeah. So basically, let's assume that I have departments, class, department has many employees, right? Which means that there's a class and there's which just has nothing in it. And if we look at the table, the department table has a name, obviously, and an ID. And if we look at the employee table, it has an ID, a name, and a department ID, which is where that person works. Right? So far, so good? Who can say how the seeds.rb should look if I want to generate some sample data for these departments? Yes, Josh?
Oh, okay. Well, it's just, but
I knew that.
I'm using.
Just trying to test.
So I actually recently did something like this for our project.
Okay.
I'm using Fabricator and Faker.
Yep.
Fabricator sets up like factories, and they will make models for you.
Yep.
So like I said, like we have researchers and projects, and researchers have many projects.
Mm-hmm.
So I said like make 15. I had something that just makes 15 researchers.
Yeah.
And then projects has a foreign key for researcher ID.
Yeah.
And so then I would just say, I would just make the projects model also for them, and I'd give it then a random number between the first ID in the researcher table plus how many researchers I made.
Yeah.
So then if I had 0 through 15 researchers, which I did, then it would generate a primary ID, a foreign key in that column, 0 to 15 each time.
Yeah, gotcha.
Because the first one's 0 plus the 15.
Yeah.
And that does it. And it'll put them in like kind of randomly, but it'll be logically make sense within your database.
So you're using a gem called Fabricator.
Yeah.
That's a very popular gem. There's another one called Factory Girl, which is also a popular gem. But I'm going to tell you about how to do it without gem magic. First of all, I want to remind you of the.
I mean, you could do that without the gems. You would just 100 times make new, and then for your field.
Exactly. So if we go here really quick, and I say require Faker, gem. It's called Faker, right?
Yeah, that's it.
Gem install. Meanwhile, I will call up the documentation for Faker here. Gem Faker. Why are you taking so long? Thing. Network working? Yes, network's working. Okay, so Faker allows you to generate names, valid names just at random. Peter, George, Frank, and so on. So what you would do is, you would write a loop that goes something like a loop that goes something like 25 times do department, and I would say department, no, I would say, yeah, no, I would say D equals department dot create name colon, and I would use Faker dot new. I forgot the exact syntax to create a fake name. So this creates 25 departments as records, and then I would go the next line. I would go 10 times do nested here, right? I don't need this. And then I would say employee, and I would say this. Here's the interesting part. D dot employees let me write it out. I'm going to write it out instead of giving the shorthand. I would say employee equals employee dot create name, some other fake name, and then I would go emp dot department equals D depth. And sense? Anybody? Yes?
When you do DB seeds, is this what gets executed?
When you do DBC, the seeds.rb file gets executed as Ruby file, and I just wrote a little Ruby program in here. Who understands this and wants to explain it to somebody else? Does everybody understand this? Everybody talk to your neighbor and explain it to each other. Everybody talk to your neighbor and explain it to each other.
Marzos and where we're taking a lot of
so I comment whenever I want to do something new to the database. I comment on things, and then 10 times everything in all the database. I can just keep all those users. I don't want to screw with that part. So I just play with it twice.
You guys have to go on Faker and see what the categories are.
Yeah, there's different categories you can put in there, so it'll see different types of things that way you get the appropriate kind of things rather than getting a with random copies. So yeah, Oz URL is a random image generator on the Orange Flickr, so it's a fake Flickr that has a bunch of random images in it, and it just aimlessly picks them and sees them.
How's that?
That's going to be, yeah.
Hey.
So here
Do you see now? Does that make sense? Everybody good?
What do you mean? Product
Everybody
information column or
understand?
table. Yes. It fills in the front end.
All good? Okay. Can you explain to us what line 7 is doing?
So each employee is the partner.
Pardon?
Each employee is the partner is the part which you save in line 4.
Exactly. So that's creating the association. So it's often simpler than you think once you see the magic. It's very simple. I believe that the shorthand for this would be employee department dot build. I think it is. Let me put it this way. Department dot employees, add an employee to it, employee dot create da 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 da. So you can actually shorten it by just by just doing it like this, which is basically push onto a list. But breaking it down, it's like that. Okay. So the thing with seeds.rb, it's just Ruby program that gets executed every time you do a DB migrate, DB create. Yes.
What is name fake name? Fake person.
Yeah, good. So that's the gem I was trying to show you, but it was taking forever to load. So let's go back to here. So now we can go to pry. So this is so here's the faker. So I can say require faker, which is a gem, and I can type 100 times do our curly bracket put s faker name dot name. Okay, so there's 100 names, and there's all kinds of fake data in there. So if you put, instead of putting name fake name, you put name faker name dot name. Every time it gets called, it generates another name. Very handy for generating test data. Okay, and as you can see here, there's fake addresses, fake emails, fake bitcoins, fake business names, fake codes, commerce, blah blah blah. Just a million different fake things. Okay, and that makes it fun because when you have real significant amount of seed data, it makes your demo and your testing much more entertaining and much more realistic. Okay, moving on. Any questions about this? Everybody good? All right. moving on. Where are you? So what I'm going to jump back to now is a quick review of all the different languages of the internet that you will have to use. And I'm going to spend more time on some than on others. But basically the funny thing about developing software in the current world of technologies is that there's no product on the planet that uses just one programming language. They all use many different programming languages. And so whether you like it or not, you're going to be exposed to not only Ruby, but JavaScript and HTML and CSS and SQL, XML less so, and JSON. I mean, in 2015, those are all languages you need to know. Now, you're not going to need them. First of all, they're not nearly as complicated as Ruby, A, and B, you're not going to have to be an expert in all of them, but you're going to have to be somewhat conversant in them. So I want to visit them really quickly, okay? First, as a general point to think about is, even though the only one on this list, well, it's not even on this list, even though Ruby is what you think of as a programming language, each one of these things is kind of like a programming language in the sense that there is a syntax, you can have syntax errors, and there's a notion of what it means to execute it. Although the notion is only vaguely related to what it means to execute a Ruby program. But they're all like little programming languages. So you can write it correctly or incorrectly. Depending on the interpreter you're using, it can be very tolerant and just ignore the errors, or it can just ignore the whole file if it has one error in it but never give you an error message. There's any number of strange ways it can fail. Okay? But you need to be convergent. So I'm going to jump into XML just because it's the granddaddy of them all, and because HTML, that we know well, is basically a sub-dialect of XML. But I will not spend a lot of time on it. But essentially, XML stands for Extensible Markup Language, which means it has no semantics at all. All it is a standardized way to represent hierarchical data. And so the characteristics of XML are that you have all these angle brackets. And angle brackets, let me just enlarge this a little bit. Angle bracket entities are matched with a slash counterpart, and they have to be matched, and things are nested. So in this case, this would be a way to represent a student, a record or structure, struct or whatever you want to call it, which has two fields, name and gender, and those two there as text. And the first line, which is often used in all these formats, is that the first line sometimes is a declaration of what version of the standard is being used. So that's XML. You will have relatively little to do with it, so I will not spend any more time on it unless there's a question about it. Okay. Let's go to HTML, much more popular. HTML, of course, is the language that you guys have all been using in your ERB files. It is the language that's used to render pages in a browser. That's its job in the world. Given a bunch of text, draw a picture. Now, it's not any picture. Pictures happen to all look like web pages, right? And there's a humongous collection of tags, as I can show you here. It goes on and on and on and on and on. You don't have to know them all, obviously, but there are some that are so common that you do need to know them. And you will learn them and memorize them. And I'm going to go through them really quick. There's a set of tags, H1, H2, H3, H4, which correspond to headers, big, medium, small, small, and smaller. That's the header tag. There's the A tag. A stands for anchor, but what it is a URL. So basically in the browser, this is displayed by a sentence, which when you hover over it, gets an underline by default, or it gets highlighted. Notice that, look, if you can read, can you guys in the back read this? Okay. Notice that here's A, and it's got, I'm going to talk about this in a second. Here's the closing angle bracket. This is just straight up text. It could be anything. It could be a picture. It could be any tag in here. The stuff in here can expand to be a whole big box. The effect of it is that whole big box now becomes a link. Okay, so when you click on an image and it navigates somewhere, then what's going on in an oversimplified sense is there's an A, href equals that, and then in there an image tag, which the image, and then end A. And the effect is this whole image is now clickable. And when you click on it, it does an HTTP GET, only a GET, to this URL. Okay? another feature of all the tags is that you can have, in fact, this is a feature of XML, so it inherited from XML, one or more of these, I think they're called options, whose syntax is a word followed by an equal sign, followed by a quoted string, always a quoted string. Okay? So that's the A tag. P tag is a paragraph, which is a block of text with a space. OL stands for ordered list, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, A, B, C, D, E. Ordered lists are put together like this. This is really elementary, so forgive me if this is really old hat to you guys, but I just want to quickly draw it out. So if I do OL / OL, that means that this is going to be an ordered list. And if I go LI, LO / LI, LI, actually it's all lowercase, so LI, goodbye, / LI. This is an ordered list of 2 elements. The first element is going to be number 1. The second element is going to be number 2. So what I get out of this is 1.LO, 2.goodbye. Good? If I change this from OL to UL, unordered list, now I get this, bullet, bullet. Okay? Okay. Span is a unstructured way to collect a bunch of information together. For example, if I wanted to paint a name selection of text or other info red, I could turn it into a span so I had something to refer to it. And the way you paint any, well, let me just, no, I'm not going to do that. The way you paint it red is either, the not recommended way, is you paint it red by adding additional properties on the span tag that says this section of text is not going to be changed in size, in position, or anything, but I can add properties like make it blink. But that's not the recommended way. The recommended way is with CSS. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. CSS files, so these things are stored in .html file. And often, if not always, there's an associated CSS file which has styling information, color, size, placement, spacing, things like that. Classically, although this is not really followed, the HTML file was meant to only contain semantically meaningful information and not anything about the layout. So semantically meaningful information for this is simply that I want an unordered list of hello and goodbye. The default rendering on a page is just a matter of style. The reason is that there's other things that read HTML. In particular, what is not a browser that reads HTML that's fairly important? Yes? A screen reader. A screen reader, right? What would a screen reader do? What does a screen reader do? Anybody? Anybody ever seen one or heard of them? No? Nobody back here? No? Yes?
I Googled this, so it's kind of cheating. But
That's okay.
It
That's
just,
legal.
It identifies and interprets what's being displayed on the screen.
Who would use that then?
Bots and Leap.
Pardon?
Bots and like bots.
Not bots, no.
Obama.
Humans.
Oh,
Humans. People without eyesight.
Oh. I was thinking more like automation.
Obama. What?
I thought you were talking about those things that he uses to read.
No. That's a teleprompter.
Yeah.
A screen reader is used for people without vision, and basically they can go to the web page, and the web page can read it to them.
I see.
Not Obama. So it could say list of clever jokes. First one, Obama, and so it would read it. And that's the idea. That's called the there's a term for that. Accessibility, accessible web pages. Anyway, that's I only bring that out to emphasize that classically HTML was meant to only contain semantic information, the content itself, and the styling, font, sizes, spacing, color, stuff like that was to be kept separate, and it's kept separately in the CSS file. Going on, div is a block of text that is, and I'm going to show you in the browser in a second. In fact, why don't you all create a file on your desktops called test.html. Go into your text editor for that file, and in a window side by side, go into your web browser and open that file. Okay? And I'm going to do the same thing. Okay, I'm going to open the file in my browser, and you just do a file open, or open file, whatever, and there's test.html, and there we go. So the first thing we notice, and play along, and of course go off to do whatever you want, the first thing you notice is that if there are no angle brackets, the left is the browser, the right is the text editor. If there's no angle brackets, it just presents back what it saw. All right, let's put in a wrong side. Here we go. Let's put in h1/h1. Refresh. Gets bigger. Okay. Let's put in unordered list. List item. So here are the funny jokes. /h2. Hello, Edo. LI bots. LI Obama. And close this. Okay? So we have an unordered list with 3 items. We have an H1 and H2. Okay? Let's put a bunch of text in. And let's say over here paragraph. 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 Notice it's always in pairs. And I refresh over here. And the paragraphs, like that. Okay? Let's go in here and add a span. /span. If I refresh this page, what do you think is going to change over here? What's going to change if I refresh the page? Pardon? I heard something. What's going to change if I refresh the page? All I did was I added span and end span. Try it. Try it on your computer. Try it.
Where'd you get the text?
It's called lorem ipsum text. I knew somebody was going to ask. Somebody always asks.
We always use Latin for these illustrations.
Well, in particular, they use that sentence, lorem ipsum, blah, 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 blah. And in my editor, probably yours, if you just type lorem pad, it appears. Many editors have that as a macro.
Oh, cool.
Of all the things I showed you, that's the most interesting. It's sad. Okay, so what does the span do? Pardon? Well, I do. I put all this text in the span. No, it doesn't change the display at all. It does not change the display at all, but it establishes a section of text that I can now style. If I want to make all this red, I can designate it by span and span. Okay? Let me just see what else is in my list here. Then there's some structural things that, yes?
What's the difference between a div and a span?
Okay, try it and you tell me. Try it. Anybody, who can tell me first the difference between a div and a span?
Div actually takes up space.
Yeah, divs are, yes.
Div affects, you more use it to like divide a web page into certain sections, where a span is more to divide the text that's within the divs.
I think of yes, that's correct. You're both correct. I think of a span like a selection, as if you highlighted it, and I think as a block, as a div as a block, as a paragraph almost. But in both cases, they're creating marks in the text that I can now subsequently use.
Like the ID equals
I got to do that, and I have to do a few more things to then.
You can do that on a span too, right?
Yeah, you can do it on everything actually. Okay, so you're going to CSS, but before I run, HTML has a whole bunch of structural tags. The whole file should be surrounded by HTML, but you see how tolerant it is. I didn't do it, it didn't complain. And then within HTML, there's two parts. One called the head, which contains declarative stuff, and one called the body, which contains the actual HTML. It's very tolerant. I didn't put any of those in, it still worked. But more typically, what you would have is, you'd have, in a little bit less fake world, you'd have a HTML tag here, you'd have a head tag here, head tag here, you'd have a bunch of stuff, you'd have an end of the head tag, okay. And then you'd have a body tag, and then you'd have an end of the body tag, and then you'd have an end of the HTML tag. Okay, that's more correct, and sometimes you need it because there's declarations that you have to put inside the body. Okay. All right. Anything that you want to? Oh, let me go on a little bit actually, because I have some good additional topics here. There's attributes that you can put on any tag here, and the format is a lowercase word, equal sign, a text string, and the crux of it is what the lowercase word is. And the very, very common ones that you will see are ID equals and class equals. They both serve to name that section of HTML. So if I put, for example, here, ID equals, it could be anything first, and I put down here, ID equals second, I've created basically a naming. I've created names for these paragraphs, which I can then subsequently use to annotate and decorate the display. So I can actually demonstrate that by showing you something that is not good form, but I'll show it to you anyway, because it's handy for debugging. I can put here style equals color colon red semicolon, and I refresh the page again. Okay? So what I've done is I've put what they call this inline CSS. This syntax, word, colon, word, semicolon, that's CSS syntax. And this allows me to put CSS right together with the text. But usually this is bad practice. You would put this in a separate file, and I'll show you how to do that. But here you see the job of the span. It didn't change the text a bit, but it allowed me to name that particular set of letters so I could then style it.
This is so 90s.
Pardon me?
This is so 90s. Like back in the day when everything was just HTML.
Yep, absolutely. Well, why don't you, how do they do it today?
I mean, then you have like CSS that you can actually use.
Oh yeah, right. This is good for debugging. I mean, you always will do this, the experimenting, you just do it here. In fact, there's something else you can do, which I'll show you while we're at it, which is go to your develop menu, or whatever the equivalent is in your particular browser, and you widen it. And what you can do here, similarly, is I can go find this line. It says, here are the funny jokes, right? I can go over here to my rules, and I can add a rule. In fact, I can add it in any number of ways. I'm going to add it by going double-click, which allows me to edit it.
Wait, what is that again?
I'm going to show you. I'm at H2 here to funny jokes. Remember, I'm in the browser now, right? And I can say here, style equals color colon red semicolon close quote space, and I did something wrong because it didn't work. Try it again. Maybe I should just say style equals quote color colon red semicolon close quote. Yeah, and now it's red. So what have I done? I'm sitting in the browser. I have not modified my HTML file. I've modified the HTML as it currently lives in memory in the browser, and I've added, you can't read this, but it says style equals color red. I've added totally transient CSS to this page. Very handy if you're experimenting. Very handy if you want to see, wow, what if instead of, what if I wanted this to be bold? Of course, I don't remember what it is, but let's say it's, I don't know, you have to look up what anyway, you can experiment and see the immediate effect. If I refresh this browser window right now, what's going to happen and why? Yes? If I refresh this browser window, what's going to happen and why?
The heading color should go away.
Because?
Because you only specified it in this current session.
Refresh means read the file, and again, the file hasn't been modified. Okay? Let's go on. I'm doing good on time. Great. I'm going fast because this is for some of you to totally review, and it gives you enough to be dangerous, and then you can go read about it because there's 100 million options on all these things. Okay? So let's go on. The two important ways to, if you're going to do proper design, which is the CSS, the cascading style sheets, are in a separate file. Then you can name a section like this, ID equals second, or you can name a section by saying class equals intro. And they both give a name. This is a little bit subtle, and you're gonna trip yourself up on it many times. They both give a name to a corresponding paragraph. Is called second. H1 is called intro, but there are two kinds of names. You can give a tag a class name, and that means that everywhere in on this page where a tag has that class name, you want to apply the same CSS. Or you can give a tag an ID, which is meant to be unique. Only one tag has a particular ID. So I should only have in my whole system only one tag called second, ID second. Now the funny thing is that this is not actually verified, validated. But if you don't follow this rule, things will break in mysterious ways. So by and large, you can have your whole life and be very happy never using IDs and just using classes. Okay? But let's see how this stuff is actually operated upon. See if I want to touch on any of this stuff. No, I'm not going to talk any of this stuff. We're good. So that's the 100 million miles an hour introduction to HTML. Everybody feel fairly comfortable? Remember, there's really good links here. Oh, you can also play with them online, by the way. Look in the CSS desk where I can see here on the right the effect of what's on the left. So I can say, oh, let's call it H1. And put the end H1 in here. And boom, it changed. Oh, I don't have to say it. It's right there. Oh, what if I want to make it, change the border radius from 5 pixels to 54 pixels. That didn't do anything. Try this one, 54 pixels. That didn't do anything. This is probably old school stuff. Change the background color to 0F. Okay, so anyway, you can change this. This is the CSS, and that's the corresponding HTML. And the idea is it's whizzing wave. You can make changes here, you can make changes here, something like here. Okay, let's dive into, so look at those links when you start studying this stuff. Let's dive into CSS a little bit. Nope. All right, CSS. Okay, CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheet. So the first thing that's important is you have to tell the HTML file what CSS file goes with it, because they travel in pairs, right? So the first thing you do is you put a line that looks a little bit like this. Oops. Into your HTML file. Oh, I'm not going to use Bootstrap, though, not right now. No, just going to go test.css. And then you're going to also create a file called test.css. And so far it has nothing in it. But basically now by virtue of having put, this is like an include, basically. And it says, oops, I don't need this. I gotta put a typo, like that. No, wait a minute, link, blah, 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 close this. Why is it doing that? I should say / link, unless there's no, there's maybe one without the closing thing. Okay, so basically this is like an include, and it says go locate test.css in the same directory, read it in and use it. Now what does it mean to use a CSS file? Well, most elementary will put a, where's my mouse? Here it is. We're going to go to this test.css and I'm going to put in here, paragraph, anytime you see a paragraph, make the color green. Okay? Yes?
You said that the file name is a colon.
Oh, you're right, thank you. Yep, test comment, yep, see it. Okay? And so if I go over here, if I go over here, and I refresh this, okay, let's see what happened. I said whenever there's a P, make it green, right? So, to interpret this file, this letter P standing by itself means any tag called P, i.e. a paragraph tag. And it says, make them all green. Now, why is this part here still red? Well, first of all, why are those all green? Let's start with that. They're all green because these are both paragraphs, P and P. Nothing else is P, so that's why these two get to be green. And then there's here, embedded in there, there's a span that says color red. There's a principle in CSS that the more specific indications override the more general ones. The more specific indications override the more general ones. So in this case, obviously, this is the most specific you can because you put it right in line. That's going to override it. If I remove this style, but instead I say ID equals funky. So now we have, the appearance is the red goes away because nothing is saying red anymore. Yes? However, when I go into my CSS file, I can say, okay, anything that's funky, color.
You need to close your bracket by P.
I do, you're right, thanks. Gray. Now let's look at this notation. Pound. Just to make your life complicated, the syntax in CSS to indicate an ID is pound name. Corresponds to ID equals name. Okay? So anything in this HTML file that has ID funky is going to be drawn gray. Let's see if I'm right. There it is. Okay? Analogously, if we recall that class intro was used to tag this particular H1, if I put dot intro, that's the notation for a class, color, colon, orange, and I refresh. The H1 was marked class intro, as you can see here, and it was painted orange. Furthermore, and finally, I can say this, finally to illustrate a point. Unordered list with okay. H2 color pink. Pretty sure that's the right syntax. Nope, it's not. It is just space. See if that's it. No. You see that the syntax is mysterious. Okay. This is actually a bad example. This is a tricky one. This syntax says any H2 that is embedded somehow under a UL, make it pink. Any H2 that's embedded somehow under a UL, make it pink. No, that's incorrect. I said the wrong thing.
Yeah.
I did say
There
that.
are funny jokes is also.
Yes, exactly. And so this is a whole query language essentially of how these things get parsed. Can somebody who knows CSS tell me or look it up? What I want is the syntax for a selector, that's what these things are called, that would select only H2s that are under ULs.
You nest them. You nest it, so you create a UL and then the brackets, and inside of that you do H2 in brackets.
That's CSS or is that SCSS?
Probably
SCSS. You need SCSS.
No, I want SCSS. I want to do it in CSS. SCSS, by the way, for those who don't know, is yet another language, which is a variant or a preprocessor on CSS to confuse the world. But for simplicity and for learning, I like to stick to the basic things, and then as you get more advanced, you can play with them. So who finds me the answer?
Let's repeat the question.
The question is, in CSS, I want to have a selector that indicates only H2s that occur somewhere inside of a UL. Yes?
You just do a space.
Just do a space. Oh, yeah, right, because, okay, of course, and there is no H2 inside this UL, but we can put one in, because here's the UL, there's no H2 inside of it. So if I do this, H2, remember, everything can be nested, okay? So this says make a header size 2 as the second bullet. Perfectly valid. So now I have an instance where I have an H2 subservient or below a UL, and if we are correct, an H2 is subservient to a UL. When I refresh this, Obama gets H2 because it's big and it gets to be pink. That's this rule in action. So,
can you go back to the test HTML file?
Yeah. So basically, what you got here is a fully hierarchical tagging system called HTML that has the ability to give a name or an identifier to any subpart of it. And then you have a separate file which has a whole large number of styling parameters. Color is the simplest to show, but there's a million of them. And CSS has a language called selectors, which are like little query strings that say, style, according to this, any tags that match this query. So I call the query, they call it the selector, but this query says, every piece of HTML that's under a P, that is a P, this says, any piece of HTML that has ID equals funky. This says, any piece of HTML that has class equals intro. This says, any piece of HTML that has an H2 occurring sometime inside of a UL. Okay? And yes?
How does the browser determine which one corresponds to which tag? Does it just do a search or?
You mean? Yeah. I mean, it's not a search because
just like say find me the first thing that has a U1 and an H2.
Yeah.
That's
it's not a search because upon reading the HTML to begin with, it's built a very elaborate internal data structure corresponding to.
It builds like a tree or something.
A very elaborate tree. They call it the DOM, Domain Object Model. The DOM is the internal representation of the HTML,
right.
And it's basically what you see when you look here.
So it does like a sort of binary search when it wants to find these things.
Well, it's a lot more. It probably has indexes to all these things already pre-made, you know. But here you see the DOM. You can't see. I can't make this bigger. And that's the DOM. And as you click on bits, on the right here, you see that this line that says li bots li is styled as follows. Li, there are no attributes. By default, there's a style sheet built into the browser that says all LIs are list items, and they're all aligned matching the parent. And then finally, there's a whole other set of default things. So there's no styles coming from me, but there's a bunch of default styles coming from the browser. Okay? If we want to take a look at let me just give you these reminders because they're very classic mistakes to make. P is the selector. Curly bracket is always matched. No semicolon after the curly bracket. Word, colon, either a keyword. By the way, remember that in HTML, the ID was quoted. I don't have it here. But in CSS, it's not. So it's basically always word or selector, which is a little bit of syntax, curly bracket, as many lines as you want. Each one ends with a semicolon, word, colon, word. If you leave out the semicolon, it doesn't work. If you quote things, or if you leave out the colon sign, it doesn't work. It'll just ignore it. Okay? Here's actually my shorthand. I just looked at my own notes of the different kinds of selector. An ID is pound, a class is dot, an element, a type of tag, is by itself. Compound, things like UL, pound, remark, page means any cases of UL tags with ID remark and any cases of class front page. Why do I say all that? Who can help me? I just recited what this selector does. Who can recite it back to me and explain why? Anybody? Anybody who's not saying something is totally lost. Is that a fair assumption? Not getting it? Okay.
I think it's just saying if it's specific, you're going to tag it with front page, so anything that's on your front page with that tag.
What kind of tag? The critical thing is, what kind of tag? Is it a class or an ID?
So the hashtag is for the
ID, yeah.
And then the dot is for the class front page.
So the way I read this is, UL, that's the type of tag, a UL. ID with ID equals remark. Comma means or. That's one category I will match with. Or any, oh wait, there's no space here, I'm sorry, this is a dot. So read this, it's a UL tag, ID equals remark, class equals front page. All those together will get display none, which means invisible. There's a lot of good links in here. I'm not going to subject you to them, but really, as you're struggling with this, you can come back here to some good pointers. One amusing one to look at is this thing called the CSS Zen Garden. This is, the thing that's amusing about this is that it's a massive collection of CSS files, all applied to the exact same HTML, to show how much crazy stuff you can do with exactly the same HTML. All we're changing are the CSSs. Here's one, screen filler. Here's another one. Same file. Here's another one. See, the road to enlightenment, glittering dark. There's a continuing need to show. Go back to screen filler. Glittering, the road to enlightenment. There's a continuing need to show. It's the same HTML file. And they changed that much just by different CSSs. So go to Zen Garden and poke around.
Do they show you the source code for the...
I'm sorry?
Yeah, do they show you the CSS file?
Absolutely, yeah, they do. It's both a demonstration tool. See here it says download the example HTML file and CSS file right here. Next design. View all designs. So this is when you're a graphic designer or a web designer, you're really good with images or with visuals. You often, this is what you do. You know, the Rails programmer gives you an HTML file with a bunch of IDs and classes all over the place, and you go nuts and make it look. Look at this. These are all the same. Look at this. They're all the same. Same HTML file. And it goes on and on. That's what a web designer does. Yes, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just want to recommend a framework called Bootstrap.
Yeah.
I don't know the word for it.
Well, Bootstrap is it, and I want you guys to use Bootstrap. It's a package of CSS that automatically makes your pages look modestly professional. Not fancy, not wonderful, but at least they don't look like a 5-year-old, which is what you'll get if you do it yourself. So I recommend you use Bootstrap. Okay, before I let you go, just really briefly, I want to just quickly look at tomorrow. We already talked about this. Tomorrow is very little to do, but a lot. Prepare for your presentations, do the information, and write a progress report. Okay? And that's what we're going to do the whole time. Any time that's left, we'll just code. Okay, thanks everybody.
Submissions to work like controller. Like the IDs that I use. So part of our challenge we're talking about and other stuff. So I can use it because it's obviously like
Why don't you grab one?
I think it got them.
I have a class now. Otherwise I would. And like I can't find like street move for example on mine, which is I feel like I must be like missing something kind of. Yeah.
Well, send an email with a link to your code and ask one of my search.
Okay. Go open.
I guess Jacob I have no problem getting it to display but anything going the other direction.
I think you're catching on pretty good. I sound your question. I'm going to walk following things pretty well.
That bit, that needs to work.
Well, yeah. There's a form demo in. Did I give you guys a form demo to look at?
Maybe? You got a lot of stuff on your site. I mean, there's something that I could find code for this class.